welcome to Dead On, the show that brings you the Constitution, the law, and current events. And we are on episode 7 of Dead On, fairly new show. And this is an attorney advertisement, and nothing said, and any of these shows should be taken as legal advice. I have John Dawson with me, and he has done dozens of bankruptcies. And we're going to talk about kind of an interesting subject. The NRA, which is the National Rifle Association, which says that it's in charge of protecting the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, is declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So, John, what have you heard about this case?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me. So what I've heard is that the NRA is, I think they're out of Virginia, but they are a 501c4 corporation, tax exempt. And so, there are certain rules for tax exempt entities in terms of, not for profit. And so I think the Attorney General of the state of New York has suddenly decided that the executives of the NRA have been spending money improperly, and this is part of the basis for their lawsuit.
So is the NRA station? Is they headquarters in New York, or why?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so even though they're from Virginia, there's some kind of legal status in New York, and
they developed a legal status there, and they've stated openly that they want to have that same status in the state of Texas.
Okay, so wait a minute. So this is the state attorney general,
yes.
Right? And what's her name?
Letitia, I'm not sure.
Okay, so the state attorney general of New York, and is the state attorney general of New York, is she pro-gun or anti-gun?
Oh, she's definitely anti-gun.
So she has made some statements that are anti-gun, probably?
Publicly, yes.
Okay, and so the NRA is very pro-gun, and they believe that everyone has a right to carry a gun, even before the Constitution. They say it's a God-given right. Isn't that true?
Well, as you know, it's a second of many amendments. So yeah, it's a fundamental right to keep.
Well, you have the right to bear arms. Okay. Well, I would say it's like this. What the argument is that the NRA says is
the Bill of Rights. It's number 2. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Bill of Rights is to protect the citizens against the government, and what the argument is for the Second Amendment, or even for having a gun, is that if you go back to the 10 Commandments, it says, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, every commandment has an inverse commandment, which means you shouldn't allow yourself to be killed.
Yeah, thou shalt not allow oneself to be killed.
So you have a right to.
Thou shalt fight back.
You have a right of self-defense, and you have a right to defend others, and also you're not supposed to commit suicide. So that basic religious tenet, which United States or the colonies were basically formed around the 10 Commandments, is that thou shalt not kill. And also that's not even correct. Thou shalt not kill is a bad translation. If you look back at the Latin, the Greek, and then go back to the Hebrew when that came from, it's actually thou shalt not murder, right? And by the time it got translated through a couple of things and softened up, it was thou not shalt kill. That's not true at all. You can kill.
It's a little too straightforward, because that means there is no justifiable homicide. And of course, as we know, there is self-defense, time of war.
Excuse or justification. But I'm just saying the actual wording of the original Hebrew or Greek text of thou shalt not murder. And murder is with malice aforethought, with evil intent.
Exactly.
Melon per se. And
those circumstances where one could be
prosecuted. Basically where you're having too much fun, right? You're not supposed to be killing people and having a lot of fun.
Responsible gun owners don't do those things. They seek only to defend themselves.
That is the precept of the NRA, is that you've got a God-given right, and all that Second Amendment does is actually enunciate that God-given right. You didn't even get that right from the government. You always had it. You always will have it. So that's their argument.
You don't get any rights from the government, technically.
So yeah, and also you've got to look at there's proscriptive and restrictive, and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and everything was written kind of to restrict the government. The government wasn't giving the citizens rights.
Well, yeah, we give the government its power to work. It comes from the people.
But it was basically the people were restricting the government from doing certain things that the British did that the citizens didn't like.
Exactly.
That's why they had the Revolutionary War.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we've got a situation where there's a pretty famous and outspoken guy. I think it's Pierre or something like that, the head of the NRA. And he's a very, very famous individual. and he doesn't make friends everywhere he goes. And he's kind of a target. And they're saying he committed fraud and that he had a lavish lifestyle and he spent more money than he should have. But I haven't seen so far any reports, and I haven't read the complaint, I admit. But I haven't said, it doesn't say he embezzled and he hid some money in a Cayman account or something, right? It just says that he spent too much money having too much fun. And then if you look at Al Gore, he flies around talking about global warming and Learjets, right? And
all charities have extensive expense accounts for generating their fundraising.
Well, if you look at the Clintons, didn't the Clintons have like 3% that they spent on the charity? The another 95% was their,
3% that actually, it was like 3 to 8% that actually went out to these charitable causes, and the rest was spent internally.
Advertising,
quote,
and salaries.
Raising money, advertising, but mostly salaries.
And if you look at the Red Cross, it's a 95% of there goes internally, right? Or what you call the convenience.
It's actually, I was pretty amazed when I did some research on it a couple of years ago, how many major charities spend the vast bulk of their money raising money in these activities.
They're basically kickback schemes. Okay. And so I don't think the NRA.
Well, I don't know that I'd be that skeptical, Mark.
But, okay. Well, anyway, but I would say the NRA, if you compare the NRA to the Red Cross and to United Way or anything else, I don't think they're any more lavish in their spending than anybody else. That's what I would say.
No, they spend a lot of their money, protecting the Second Amendment.
Right, but I'm still saying I don't think they do. I don't think they're any worse than any of these other charities that are 501(c)(4).
I haven't seen all the accounting. Most people probably haven't outside the NRA and whatever the state's attorney general has. But yes, I've never heard anything to suggest that it's anywhere near, even approaching unreasonable or unusual.
Well, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read the fraud complaint, forwarded by the New York Attorney General, but I haven't heard any, I haven't seen any indication that they're actually squirreling away and hiding money under a rock somewhere.
I would imagine that would have been a talking point for the prosecution.
Yeah. And so they're saying that they rent nice limos and they rent nice Learjets. And, if you look at trying to make enough meetings and, maybe a Learjet is actually cost effective,
It may well be, honestly. Just ask John Kerry.
And also going in a Learjet,
you
can study and you can do stuff on a Learjet. It's quicker. But I've talked to consultants and a lot of people who've flown on Learjets. They actually prefer to go commercial because a Learjet it's cramped, it's confining. It's not like what you see in the movies where you've got.
Depending on what kind of jet it is exactly. Yeah.
Well, generally a Learjet is like a functional Learjet.
Yeah, Learjet, you don't really get to stand up if you're over 6 foot. You don't.
I don't even know if you can go to the bathroom in a Learjet. So, I've talked to people who, for consulting, went on Learjets, and they're like, "I'd rather take a commercial flight. I'd rather have first class in a commercial flight. It's more stretch room and everything else."
I would too.
So anyway,
not always.
But
sometimes it's cool.
But I've never gotten to go on a Learjet. But one time I was flying coach, and I was flying back from Japan, and they said, "Well, there's an extra seat in first class." It was nice. First class is nice. Okay, when you're going internationally. Okay, so anyway, so basically the NRA is going to move to Texas. They're getting sued in New York. They don't think they can get a fair shake there. And so they're going, we're just going to cut our losses.
They have the right to ask the bankruptcy court for relief.
And also
the type of pressure that's been brought to bear.
And also, I think they're going to say the venue will end up being in Texas instead of New York. And they figure they would get a fairer hearing in Texas than you will in New York. And a lot of people.
Well, yeah, that brings up the question of, is this politically motivated purely?
Yeah.
And I happen to be of the opinion that it is largely politically motivated, but perhaps the Attorney General just needed to, of New York, needed to find a basis to make a claim that, at least gave the appearance of having merit.
Well, I'll tell you,
I'm not suggesting that it does, because again, I'm not privy to that.
What I find with bankruptcy judges, they've seen a lot of things happening, and they've seen a lot of scams, they've seen a lot of fraud, and they've been around the block. And I think the bankruptcy court is a pretty good place to determine whether someone's embezzling money or not, right? Because
Absolutely.
That's what they're looking for. They're
And
used to looking
they
at
look at
accounting.
these types of companies all the time.
No, but I'm just saying bankruptcy
Yes.
judges are good at this. And
Yes,
if
they
you're,
are.
and if the NRA is innocent and they didn't do anything nefarious, their best luck is in front of a bankruptcy judge because he knows about embezzlement and he can say, look, I've done 10,000 cases and 4,000 or 2,000 were embezzlement. I've seen a bunch of embezzlement. This ain't one, right? Whereas your regular judge may not have that background and could say,
Yeah, I think that her goal is partly to try and break up the NRA or cause them to lose their status where they are.
well, and that is it's what is a 501, what is it?
C4 as opposed to
501c4 is basically a nonprofit, right?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
It's qualified. The people looking at this probably don't want us to go into it, but yeah.
Anyway,
basically.
Okay. So anyway, chapter 11, and this looks like a preemptory. I think that's right pronunciation. Preemptory. Chapter 11. In other words, they're not bankrupt now, but they're saying if I got the attorney general after me, I'm going to be bankrupt pretty soon. So I think that's what we got, and I think that's a fair way of looking at it.
It is. I mean, at least that's how it's being reported. Again, without some additional insight, it's hard to say other than the, we know what the definition for a bankruptcy is, or to be adjudicated a bankrupt. Your debts exceed your assets, or your liabilities exceed your assets, or you cannot pay them as they come due.
Well, I would say that if you're getting sued by the attorney general, the state of New York, who has endless, and let me repeat, endless. The state has endless money. They can print it, right? And they can tax more. So
they can print it, but they can do a lot. You're right.
Well,
it's pretty near the federal standard.
Basically, they can spend it, and the feds will bail them out. So, I mean, their friends at the Fed will bail out at New York. New York is never going to go broke because everybody's going to have to pay for New York. So anyway, they have endless money. They have a vendetta against the NRA. I think that's a pretty big liability. If I was an NRA member, I would say, yeah, that's a huge liability. You're going to go bankrupt either now or later. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to end this segment, and when we get a little more news from the NRA bankruptcy, and we can look at the complaint and see how it's going. If this moves to Texas, we'll see what the venue is, but we'll follow up on this next time. So until then, this is Dead On with Mark Malakowski and John Doxson talking about NRA Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is ready to go, and we're going to see what happens. And we're glad you could all join us tonight, and we'll see you on our next episode.